Hello and welcome to 5-Year Club video number 80, where we will discuss who lives in Washington's million-dollar homes. I saw this article earlier today. I haven't read it in detail yet, so we'll be discovering it together. And the reason why it captured me and the reason why I decided to do today's video on it is because I have talked about parameters for buying a home in terms of affordability. You know, spending less than 25% of your take-home pay, doing a 15-year mortgage, guidelines like that. I haven't talked a lot about longer-term real estate cycles, like how does, so we know real estate is volatile. How volatile is real estate? We know that real estate typically will have peaks and troughs. How frequent are those peaks and troughs, and what impact does it have? Personally, ever since being in the Bay Area, I've looked at these houses that were, over $1 million since I've been here. I first knew about Palo Alto, and that's a more expensive area. And I just looked around everywhere I went where they have expensive houses. And I'm like, is everybody a surgeon here? Like, what's going on? I live in a neighborhood of surgeons. And I didn't quite understand the dynamics of everything that was going on, but I've obsessed about it over time. It's like a hobby for me, studying it. And I've learned more about it. And this article, I think, is going to touch on a lot of things that I've learned about real estate and about who lives in really expensive houses over time. So I hope that it's enlightening. And afterwards, I'm going to do a little just example scenario discussing the dynamics of how these large changes in home prices impact rental versus buying, and what we can draw on that. Because even though in the long run properties have like a 4% growth rate, especially in wealthy cities like Washington, D.C. and San Francisco, housing prices have been incredibly volatile. I think San Jose might have even been worse than San Francisco. And that has really changed the assumptions when you model out what you want to purchase and why, and things like that. So let's just get into this article. It is from WAMU.org. I'm going to link it in the description of the video. The article is written by Matthew S. Schwartz, who lives in Washington's million-dollar homes. Barbara Martinez wonders who owns all those million-dollar homes in D.C. and why can't she be one of them? I agree, Barbara. Why can't we be one of them? Anyone looking for evidence that Washington is becoming more expensive need look no further than real estate sites. The average sale price for a home in D.C. is around $575,000. But more than 1 out of every 10 homes on the market is listed for over $1 million. Those numbers make it hard for both newcomers and longtime residents to buy in the city's most desirable neighborhoods. A couple of years ago, Barbara Martinez moved from Minnesota to the district to work for a nonprofit focused on saving the habitats of endangered species. Okay, first off, she's working in a nonprofit. Is it confusing why you can't have a $500,000 or $1 million home? Your company is not for profit. But let's keep reading. She and her husband spent $389,000 on a one-bedroom condo in Woodley Park. Martinez said she found the amount depressing. In all other markets, we can get so much for that amount, Martinez said. But the location was nice and she didn't mind feeling a little cramped. I spent 3 years of my life in the forest of Madagascar, she said. Well, were you building wealth during those 3 years? Whoa. Snipey Lewis comes out. All right. Soon, Martinez and her husband had their first child, and they realized more room was really a necessity. Not long into their search for a new home, they realized that all the places they really liked were way out of their price range. Did they look before they had the baby? That would have been a good move. In fact, it seemed to Martinez that a lot of homes in the nicest areas of D.C. were going for at least $1 million. She started wondering, who are the people who are buying the $1 million homes in DC? So this is interesting because these are different questions. Who are buying $1 million homes and who actually live in $1 million homes? Different questions. Martinez says her question came out of a dark place. I agree with her on that. Comes out of a dark place for me. Why can't I have a house? Ah! All right. She felt she had done everything right. She had gotten a good education, landed a job she enjoyed and felt good about, but the lifestyle she was working towards still seemed so far out of reach. This is interesting phrasing for me. She felt she had done everything right. She had gotten a good education. She landed a job. Doesn't say a good job, doesn't say a high-paying job, just says a job she enjoyed. So enjoying the job and making money at a job, different things. And felt good about feeling about your good job and making money, different things. And she already mentioned that part of her past was spending 3 years in Madagascar. I don't think they pay that well in Madagascar. Could be wrong. Gotta look it up. But the lifestyle she was working toward, so she's not working towards independence. She's working towards a lifestyle, which is code for consumption. The consumption level that she's working towards still seemed so far out of reach. Well, if you're working at a nonprofit and you're picking your job based on how you feel, having a high consumption level being out of reach is not surprising. She started wondering, why am I not to that point yet in my life? My husband and I talk about this, and we're both on the same page, because we walk around our neighborhood and we wonder, who are these people? Why is it not us? Why are we not living in these homes? Said Martinez. It wasn't always this expensive. While people like Martinez, who recently relocated to Washington, may think that $1 million homes were always the norm, the high prices are actually a fairly recent development. See, I hope she doesn't think this was always the norm, while people like Martinez, because that means that she hasn't researched historical prices, so she actually doesn't know where they are in the market cycle. When I bought a condo, I was looking at the prices from the very beginning to see what the trajectory was over the long run. All right. High prices are actually a fairly recent development. In the late 1990s, the median home price in Washington was just over $150,000, which is actually the same as my neighborhood in Georgia when I was growing up. So, yeah, I guess they used to be Georgia prices. But around the year 2000, prices began to rise. And in just 5 years, the median home price rose from $159,000 to $420,000. Holy crap. In the early 2000s, young professionals began pouring into the city, and couples started considering DC a good place to raise children. Then interest rates dropped from 8% in 2000 to under 6% in 2005. This change gave people more purchasing power, which meant sellers could ask more for their homes. Prices started to rise. The subprime mortgage crisis in 2008-2009 tempered home prices a bit, but over the past 5 years, they once again have been on the rise, and the market shows no signs of cooling down. And I gotta say that I don't see interest rates going up to 8% or 6%. I hope they do, because that would mean the economy continues to do really well, and likely the stock market continues to do really well. But I think there's a lot of evidence that we're going to have some kind of economic crash, that there's going to be a recession in the next 10 years. And to mitigate that, I think it's likely the U.S. government will at least be forced to stop raising interest rates. And right now we're at like 4.125 for a 15-year. And so I don't think we're going to get back to 8%, but I hope we do, because that would also mean that bonds are returning a good amount and the economy is doing well. Let's see. Yeah, subprime mortgage crisis 2008 tempered. Yeah, okay, so DC home prices really hot. On a late summer day, Martinez... Oh, I don't want to outpace you there. On a late summer day, Martinez went to an open house on Macomb Street in Washington's Cleveland Park neighborhood. It's one of my favorite neighborhoods, Martinez said. The houses are beautiful. The house in question, with 4 bedrooms and 3 baths, is known to the neighbors as the Gingerbread House. The 1,700 square foot home, which has 4 bedrooms and 3 baths, was listed for $1.19 million. The house also features a picturesque forested backyard near a tributary that leads into Rock Creek Park. Robert Edmonds, who owns a computer server company, attended the open house. Edmonds and his wife, a senator's aide, own a townhouse in Adams Morgan that has appreciated in value, which made it possible for them to consider the Cleveland Park home. I think it would have been a lot more challenging to try to buy now, Edmonds said. We purchased about 15 to 18 years ago when the market was just starting to really skyrocket. So 15 to 18 years ago in 2018 would be 2000 to 2003. And yeah, that's what they said, that around the year 2000 it really started to go up. I wanted to start a family and we wanted to get some liquidity, and I think we just happened to do it at the right time. If we did it 8 or 10 years later, I think we really might have regretted it for a while at least. So this guy owns a company, which means that he probably makes bank. It's also a tech company. And he bought a property when they were significantly cheaper 15 to 18 years ago. And so, yeah, he's in a pretty good position. But I got to point out, this guy who owns a tech company, likely at this open house, way higher income than our nonprofit worker. Perhaps her husband makes much better money. And hey, maybe she's like senior super executive director nonprofit CEO boss thing. I don't know. But typically speaking, nonprofits can't pay their employees exorbitant salaries or their donors get disturbed. All right, keep going. Absolutely a stereotype. Edmund's story isn't unique. Many residents of DC's most desirable areas have lived in them for decades. And I think this is a very important point. And it's certainly true for San Jose, Willow Glen, and the more expensive areas of California. Gwen Wright, the planning director for Montgomery County, Maryland, moved to D.C. in the late 1980s. She first rented a place at 18th and Swan Streets Northwest in DuPont Circle. In 1994, Wright and her partner bought a condo a few blocks away for about $120,000. We hit the real estate market at the right time, she said. In 2000, when they were expecting their second child, they were able to trade up. What we found when we moved to Cleveland Park is that we were absolutely a stereotype. Every family around us had done virtually the same thing. It wasn't at all conscious real estate strategy or flipping or any of that, Wright said. They were just young couples who became young families who needed more space when the dolls and Legos began taking over floors of their one-bedroom condos. Wright has always been a public sector employee. She's successful, and her husband is a lawyer. But if they hadn't purchased at the right time, she says, it wouldn't have been enough to buy a home in the neighborhood they wanted. We talk to our neighbors about this frequently. Everyone sort of says, if we had to buy our house today, we couldn't afford it, Wright said. Sometimes when I see some of these houses that are fixed up to the nines and they're going for $2, $3, $4 million, I have to say, I ask myself the same question, who is buying these houses? And I live there. In Willow Glen, you can see this very clearly. You will see, 3-bedroom houses that maybe were originally built in the 1950s or 70s, and they're relatively modest and small. But when they get redone, the interiors are decked out with all these super luxurious type things because nobody here builds a house or redoes a house unless it's a luxury style. And as a result, you get among the houses with that original construction that's relatively small, 2,000 square feet or less, from, somewhere like 1950s, 1970s. When you look at that level of house, you kind of have two types. You have the type that hasn't been fixed up and has been lived in forever, and then you have the one that was bought more recently that has marble all over the inside, and a lot of times they gut it down to the 2x4s, and then they completely redo everything. I've seen several houses completely skeletonized and redone. So I would guess it's the same thing in DC. Not all lawyers and CEOs. Researcher Rob Petingolo at the Urban Institute crunched the numbers to see if the anecdotes about DC buyers were supported by actual data. We actually used two data sources to do the analysis, Petingolo said. The first is publicly available American Community Survey data, which I think is only household level. I don't think it's at the individual level, but I could be wrong. And then we also took a look at some numbers by the DC Government Office of Tax and Revenue. So I gotta say, these American Community Survey, this data, and then also the DC Government Office of Tax and Revenue, I don't think that they have much net worth information. I think that they have income information. So it would not be surprising to me if this article talks about income next and not net worth, which, when you are talking about properties that are greater than $1 million, net worth is really the controlling thing. I can discuss that a little bit later. There are different dynamics for mortgages when you get to properties valued certainly at the 1.5 million, 2 million, and greater mark. The American Community Survey goes beyond the standard census questions to ask more detailed demographic questions like, what do you do for a living? How long have you lived in your home? And what's your home worth? To do the analysis, we limited the data down to people who answered that question by saying they think that their home would sell today for $1 million or more, Petingolo said. By narrowing down the survey data to people who live in $1 million homes, Petingolo was able to answer Martinez's question. Who are these people? According to the census data, 12% of homeowners in DC own a home worth more than $1 million. They're a little older than the average DC homeowner, 57 years old compared to 45, and they do make more money. The income of the average DC household is $68,000 per year, while the owners of $1 million homes make about $250,000 per year. So that's, I guess, maybe $125 per person. I'm not sure that it's $250,000 per person. Yeah, see, it says the income of the average DC household, the entire household is $68,000, right? So, you could have two beginning software engineers in the Bay Area, and if you add together their income, it's $250,000. I wouldn't recommend that they buy a home for $1 million, certainly not. But hey, these people probably didn't buy the home for $1 million because they are 57 and likely bought it earlier in life. The numbers show that although people who live in $1 million homes are well off, they're not the super wealthy. And the data shows that the stereotype Robert Edmonds and Gwen Wright represent is accurate. According to the data, most people who own $1 million homes bought them at least 10 years ago, and sometimes much longer ago than that. Precisely how long ago is hard to determine, since the census survey only asked respondents if they had moved into their home within the last 10 years, or longer ago than that. But, says Petingolo, it's safe to say that these residents have owned their homes for a while. While lawyers and business executives do make up a large percentage of the $1 million homeowners, that's interesting. So it's lawyers and executives who bought it a while ago? Oh, I'd like to see kind of the cross-section of when did you purchase the home versus what's your profession. So while lawyers and business executives do make up a large percentage of the $1 million homeowners, Petingolo's data shows it's less than half of the total. You might be led to think that people who live in $1 million homes are all lawyers and they're all CEOs, Petingolo said, and that just isn't the case. I think that speaks to the fact that there was a time in history when you could work in a more modest occupation and afford to buy a home that would today be worth more than $1 million. And guess what, guys? It's true today. There are places in America that have homes that are maybe $250,000 today that in 20 years will be $1 million homes because those areas are up and coming, and they may not be the same areas, or they will not be the same areas that these current $1 million homes are in. Things change. I can't say that we can predict those areas extremely well, but I'm just saying that they exist. Also, I think that we're kind of at the top of, a market cycle for real estate, not in the middle and not the bottom. And so I wouldn't count on my home value quadrupling if I bought today, no matter where it was. A little too late. Most of the people who live in the expensive homes Barbara Martinez admires were just like her, just a few years earlier. They didn't make better life choices. They didn't know something she didn't know. Most of them moved to DC at the right time, held onto property for a long time, and then traded up. I feel like I moved to DC a little too late in my life, Martinez said, but according to realtor Carolyn Wise, there is hope for people like Martinez. Carolyn Wise is a realtor. She only makes money if people purchase homes. So she is going to encourage Martinez to purchase a home no matter what. Who says that you can't afford one of those houses? Said Wise. Well, Lewis says, and Lewis cares about your net worth, and Lewis cares about you retiring into a very comfortable lifestyle someday. You might not be able to afford it today, but one of those things that a lot of people don't realize is that there's only a few steps to getting to the point where you can afford to live in one of those more expensive, desirable areas. Even though the days when you could buy a $150,000 home in DC are long gone, it's still possible to end up in an expensive home, Wise says. A lot of people who live in those $2 million houses now started out buying maybe a $150,000 place in the first place, then eventually sold it, bought a $500,000 or $600,000 house, put some work into it, paid down the mortgage so that they are building equity. That equity can then be transferred to a new house. And once you do that 3 or 4 times, you find that you are actually in a position to maybe spend 1.5 or 2 million if that's your goal. All right, guys, I wish I had actually stopped and done the math for this, and I don't have time to do it. But I have to tell you, if you trade homes 4 times or 5 times, even if we're talking about a time period like 20, 25 years, 20 years, that's going to be trading homes every 5 years. 25 years, it's like every 5 years, every 6 years maybe. I think I've talked about this before, but there is a cost to buying a home. The 30-year mortgage, if you had to get one in order to afford one of these things, stacks all the interest at the beginning. And so you're paying a lot of interest on these homes in the beginning, and therefore it's hard to pay in equity. It's hard to pay down that mortgage, right? B, when you sell the home to trade up to your next home, you're going to be paying a bunch of fees for that sale. You're going to be paying 6% to the realtors, so 6% of whatever equity you've been able to get at that point, poof, it goes to the realtors. And any fix-ups that you have to do to the home in order to get it to sell, and closing costs on the new property, and all of that stuff absorbs equity that you have paid for. And so the point is, these trades are very expensive. You're totally just losing money on them. And if home prices are appreciating fast enough for you to have enough equity to trade up quickly, given a good income. I'm not saying I don't want you to be, if you're super broke, then you're not going to be able to afford anything near a $500,000 home, no matter how much the equity is, right? So I'm saying you have a good professional job, say making between $150,000, but not like a $300,000 crazy surgeon job. If you're trading 4 or 5 times and you're paying all those trading costs, even if you're able to make the down payment after 20 or 25 years of trading up in homes, such that you would be able to buy a $2 million or $1.5 million house, because that's what she's saying, in a position to spend $1.5 or $2 million if that's your goal. When you arrive at this place, we're talking about maybe you have $600,000 in equity, right? Because that was, $600,000 equity, and you owe $900,000 on your $1.5 million house. Okay, and so 2 people making good money by that time in their career, I don't know, maybe they make 1.75. Can they technically pay, with their combined $350,000 income, can they technically pay a $1.5 million mortgage over 30 years? Sorry, a $900,000 mortgage over 30 years? Yeah, I think they probably can. I think they'll probably qualify for it at the bank. I haven't gone and done that calculation, but I'm just doing it in my head, 900,000 divided by 2, 450,000 a piece, and they've got good equity, so they don't have to pay PMI. And so, can somebody making 175 take out a loan for 450? I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, because 175 times 3 is going to be something higher than 450. So, I'm pretty sure the math works on that. All right. But you got to recognize that if you're making 175 and you're having to pay all this money into a mortgage, like, you're not saving that money. You're not building net worth. And especially like at the beginning of the 30-year mortgage on this $1.5 million property, you're going to be paying a huge amount of interest from your $175K salary, and that's all loss. So this real estate agent, she wants to sell you something, and Lewis wants you to be wealthy. So even if I can figure out a scenario where you trade up from 150 to 600 and eventually spend 1.5 million or $2 million on a home, is that going to be a luxury level home in DC? Sure. But are you going to be somebody who has a lot of net worth and has a lot of investment momentum going forward? Or are you going to be somebody who's on a work to spend treadmill with a high income? Work to spend treadmill. That's what this real estate agent's getting into. That's what this real estate agent is getting you into, and that's not where I want you to be. I want you to be on a path of accelerating investment gains so that you are on a path towards freedom, not towards luxury slavery. All right. Wise says it might be useful comparing progress in your housing situation to growth in your career. If you're right out of college, you wouldn't necessarily expect to go into your new workplace and be the CEO, right? You'd expect to put in some time, some effort, grow your experience, things like that. It might take you 15 plus years to get to the point where you're sitting behind the CEO's desk, but if that's your goal, there are steps you can take to work towards that goal, Wise said, and I agree with Wise. I might disagree with Wise on the level you need to achieve in order to justify that home purchase. If you want to purchase a home that's $1.5 million or $2 million, in Lewis's opinion, you need a net worth of, say, $6 to $8 million, and you need to pay cash for that home and not have a mortgage. And I gotta say, buying homes at $150,000, trading up to $600,000, trading up to $1 million, and then buying 1.5, that's not what gets you to a $6 million or $8 million net worth. What gets you to a $6 million or $8 million net worth is being a surgeon, having equity in a company, being a very aggressive, very high-performing earner at your job. And actually being behind that CEO's desk. The DC Council is trying to help people like Martinez by offering more assistance to first-time home buyers and reduce taxes when homes are sold. I gotta say, I think this is terrible. I do not think that the government should be trying to help people buy million-dollar properties by offering like down payment assistance programs in the form of loans, which is typically what happens. We're going to read and see if that's what we're talking about, if this is down payment assistance, because it's a waste of public money. It's a waste of public money to help people who already have a good income, who went to a good school, buy $1 million homes. There are bigger problems that public money needs to be spent on. The mayor's office is proposing some programs to reduce the cost of home ownership in the district even further. But for Barbara Martinez, at least, these efforts are too little too late. She has moved to Baltimore. She says she'll miss DC, but she feels she's getting her $1 million home for a quarter of the price. And likely Lewis would say that was the right move. So let's look at some of these public programs, and let's not look at some of these public programs because it costs money. All right. And first-time home buyer program. Major enhancements to the first buyer home, in financial assistance, and longer loan payback periods. Longer loan payback periods are not good for your net worth. Lower interest is good for your net worth. And a greater path. See, it's a greater pathway to home ownership. It's not a greater pathway to wealth. Okay, let's go to some calculations now. And make that a little bit wider so you can see what's going on here. All right, what I've done now is I have crunched the numbers for a condo in my neighborhood purchased in 2006. And the numbers that I'm crunching right now represents an actual sale. So this is very realistic data, and I know my neighborhood really well, so I know the numbers really well. And what I want to discuss now is buying versus renting in different scenarios when there are big fluctuations in the housing market. So let's say that you purchased a home in my neighborhood in 2006. You purchased it for $360,000. That was the actual purchase price. Let's say you put it on a 15-year mortgage because Lewis recommends having a 15-year mortgage. It gets you the lowest interest rate, so it's good for building net worth. And it gets your house paid off over 15 years so that you have a paid-off home when you retire. If you feed this to a mortgage calculator, you're going to get $990 of interest, $340 HOA fee. That's the current HOA fee. I think it was probably more like $280 back in 2006. $83 of interior home insurance, $375 a month in property taxes, and $300 a month in home maintenance. I took 1% of the property value for home maintenance. That's a common number. Perhaps this number could go down a little bit because the HOA fee actually covers a lot of external maintenance. So maybe 1% is too aggressive for a condo. I'm gonna let you decide. All right, so if you did this in 2006, if you did this deal, your total monthly payment is going to be something on the order of $3,000. It'll be a little bit less because this $3,000 doesn't include the tax write-offs for the interest, but it's definitely going to be, say, $2,500 or more. And of that $2,500 you pay at the beginning, $1,746 of this is loss. It's money you're not getting back. It's money that doesn't go to pay down the loan. It's just money that you are paying out and it's going away. So that's going to be your rent if you purchased this home for this condo for $360,000 in 2006. As we know, the market crashed. All right, and in 2009, that same condo, that exact same condo, was renting for around $1,300. That's what the market would bear for that condo in 2009. So imagine if you had purchased this in 2006, you're now required to shell out, something above $2,500 every month, kind of no matter what, to keep this deal going. Now, $1,746 of that is loss. So if you're looking at it from just like a numbers point of view in terms of net worth building, it's $1,746 minus $1,300. You're doing $446 worse, right, than if you had just not purchased this home and rented. And the home is completely upside down right now too, so you can't get rid of it. So you're stuck paying this extra $446 a month compared to, your renter next door who is just giving up $1,300 a month. But also you got to realize your cash flow is even worse because your cash flow is hit by this full amount every single month. And so your flexibility with your cash flow compared with the renter is like hugely different. Like the renter is like literally paying like half. If this is like say $2,600 probably after those tax write-offs, the renter at this point is like half of your cash flow problems. So like, wow, that doesn't feel good at all. So if you buy at the top of a market and then the market falls, there are going to be a bunch of years where you look at the renters and you're like, oh, this is not a good deal. And if you sell that home when you just get back to $360,000, which is exactly what the buyer did, because the buyer went through the trauma of seeing the condo value plummet. And then at that point, it was just like, oh, this has been a terrible investment. I just want to get out of this investment and not have this obligation anymore. Then what you find is that buying was just a bad deal for these people who bought in 2006. Because if they had rented, they would have paid just a lot less money. Now, given, it wasn't $1,300 rent the entire time, and given the price did come back up, and as the price came back up on the home back to $360, the rent in the area was also increasing. But it doesn't matter because you had to pay this constant amount the entire time, and it was horrible. It was bad. And have that constant loss. On the other hand, If you purchased the home in 2009 instead of purchasing in 2006, and now you fast forward, say 10 years. Now 2019 hasn't happened yet, but if we use the 2018 numbers, your effective quote unquote rent would have been less than zero. You would have been paid to live in that property for those 10 years. And that's because the price has appreciated from like 150 back up to something crazy now, like 500. It's insane. And so when you look at the rental versus ownership calculation in that time period, over that 10-year period, holy moly, it was a good time to buy. And renting's for suckers. Even if rents were at historical lows in 2009. Well, I don't want to say historical lows, because in the 80s, of course, it was even lower. But rent took a huge dip between 2006 and 2009. And therefore, my whole point with this calculation is to show you that these historical swings around the average trend line in these wealthy areas can be so great that they severely impact the should I rent or should I buy equation. If you have the money and you know that the market is like 20% lower, not of its peak, but 20% lower than the historical average house price trend since, I don't know, 1980 or whatever you want to pick, then yeah, if the market's 20% down from the trend line, or even 10% down from the trend line, from the average trend line, it's a good time to buy. And so I hope you have some money to buy when houses reach that point. And I mean, again, I'm talking about an average trend line. So like they'll eventually, like there will be housing market falls again. That's how it goes. If the market though is 20% over that average historical trend line for real estate prices in that area, then you got to think like, if I'm stuck in this home in the next 10 years because it's upside down, am I okay? If I'm stuck in this home for the next 10 years, paying this $29.46 out of my cash flow, am I okay with that? Do I have enough money left over that this does not emotionally wreck my soul? And my point is this. My point is that if you can tell that the market is above its historical trendline average, do not stretch yourself on your property purchase. Do not buy the stretch home. Be really conservative, because you don't want to be stuck with an inflated home value that's uncomfortable to pay. And if it's 20% below the historical trend line, well, I'd never recommend anybody pick up a home loan that they're uncomfortable paying, period. But I will say that if you are, say, like 20% below the historical average, not below the peak prices, but below the historical average trend line that's like somewhere in the middle of where the prices have been over time, then I'm not going to blame you if you don't go ultra frugal on the property purchase. I'm not saying to go above the 25% of take-home pay mark. I'm just saying that if you don't go down to the 10% mark, I don't blame you, because in all likelihood, over the next 10 or 20 years, that home price is going to go up 20%, hit the average mark again, and then we're going to have some other bubble, some other historical housing bubble, because we have bubbles and busts in the housing market, on 10, 20-year cycle all the time anyway. And in sometime in the next 10 or 15 years with that home, you're going to find yourself with a lot more equity, not because you paid the equity down, but because the market simply appreciated a bunch. And this is certainly true in the big cities where there's a lot of money flowing through them, and therefore there's a lot more credit risk that's built up typically, and there's also a lot more like kind of boom and bust in terms of the spending. And yeah, so that's it. That's what I wanted to point out about how to view home purchasing. I think that home markets are obviously really inflated right now. So if you are thinking about purchasing a home right now, and trust me, rents are inflated too. So I get it when you do that rental calculation versus that buying calculation. You say, maybe we should buy. Yeah, maybe you should buy. But I think prices are inflated right now. So please buy really conservatively. Don't buy your dream home right now. Buy the like good enough home. Like we can probably make this work if we can adjust our psychology by 20% in the next year home in the frugal direction. And if you take my advice, when the housing market calms down in the future, and by calm down, I mean something bad happens and the prices drop a lot, you're going to be like, oh, it sucks that my home price dropped a lot, but thank goodness that we are definitely not house poor, and we're still in a position that we can keep socking away money into this depressed stock market so that when the market comes back, we're going to make a ton of money because we're buying stocks at discount. Make sure you can easily afford your home, especially right now. Okay, that's it for 5-Year Club video number 80. I've decided tonight is the night to watch that horror movie Veronica on Netflix. I am super excited. I'm going to go make some ravioli, and I've got some kind of coconut beer. It's going to be great. Have a fabulous evening.